the voice in your head that addresses you like you're worthless. That voice has sabotaged more dreams, derailed more destinies, and destroyed more potential than any external obstacle ever could. It whispers limitations while others with fewer advantages speak possibility to themselves. It suggests caution when others with greater challenges command themselves to advance. It counsels you to settle when others with more significant barriers refuse to compromise with their potential. The difference between extraordinary and ordinary isn't talent, it's self-talk. The people you admire don't necessarily know more than you. They simply speak to themselves with authority you've never dared to use. The words you speak to yourself right now are creating the life you will live tomorrow. Your self-talk is not just casual conversation. It is prophecy. Most people live small lives because they speak small words to themselves. But you were born to rule. When was the last time you listened to yourself? Truly listen to the words you whisper in your own ear. Those private conversations shape your destiny more than any outside voice ever could. The greatest tragedy I've witnessed is someone with royal potential who speaks to themselves like a slave. I met a man in South Africa some years ago. When I first saw him, he was hunched over, eyes downcast, voice barely above a whisper. His business had failed, his marriage was struggling, and he felt like a walking disappointment. But when I saw him again just 1 year later, he stood tall, spoke with conviction, and radiated an authority that commanded respect without demanding it. I asked him, what changed? He said something I'll never forget. I stopped talking to myself like I was nothing and started speaking to myself like I was everything I was meant to become. This man discovered a truth that the most successful people on earth understand. The most important conversation you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. Think about it. You talk to yourself more than you talk to anyone else. You speak to yourself when you wake up, when you look in the mirror, when you face challenges, when you succeed, when you fail. That constant dialogue shapes your beliefs. And your beliefs shape your actions. And your actions shape your life. Many people wonder why they can't move forward. They blame circumstances, other people, lack of opportunity. But the real chain holding them back is their own tongue, not what they say to others, but what they say to themselves. I studied kings for many years, not just the kings in history books, but the kings and queens of industry, innovation, and impact. And I noticed something profound. They all speak to themselves differently. They don't ask, can I? They declare, I will. They don't wonder, why me? They state, why not me? They don't complain, this is too hard. They affirm, I am equal to this challenge. Let me tell you about Sarah. She wasn't born into wealth or privilege. She grew up in a small town where people rarely left, rarely dreamed, rarely believed they could be more. But Sarah had something special. Not talent, not connections, but a different kind of self-talk when she decided to start her own business. Everyone told her she would fail. The economy was bad. She had no experience. The market was saturated. But Sarah spoke to herself differently. Every morning she would look in the mirror and say, you are resourceful. You are innovative. You will find a way where others see no way. She faced rejection after rejection. Investor after investor turned her down. But while others would have told themselves, this is hopeless, Sarah told herself, every no brings me closer to my yes. While others would have said, I'm not good enough, Sarah said, I'm learning and growing stronger every day. 3 years later, her company revolutionized her industry. When asked about her success, she said, I failed just as much as anyone else would have. The difference was how I spoke to myself after each failure. The problem with most people is that they use language that diminishes their power. They say, I'll try instead of I will. They say, I hope instead of I know. They say, I wish instead of I choose. Royal language is language of certainty, not chance. Kings don't try, kings do. Kings don't hope, kings decree. Kings don't wish, kings command. Your mouth is the pen that writes your future. Your tongue is the paintbrush that colors your world. The words you speak to yourself create the landscape of your life. I've worked with heads of state, CEOs of multinational corporations, and influencers who shape global culture. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that their greatness began when they changed how they spoke to themselves. When you talk to yourself like royalty, your mind begins to create solutions instead of excuses. Your brain starts to notice opportunities instead of obstacles. Your spirit begins to rise to challenges instead of shrinking from them. But here's what's critical to understand. This isn't about false affirmations or empty positive thinking. Kings don't lie to themselves. They speak truth, but they speak the highest truth. The highest truth is not that you are weak, but that weakness is temporary. The highest truth is not that you have failed, but that failure is a teacher. The highest truth is not that you are broken, but that brokenness can lead to breakthrough. Let me be clear. Speaking to yourself like royalty doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means interpreting reality through the lens of your potential, not your limitations. Every king and queen throughout history understood a fundamental principle. Their words created worlds. When they spoke, things happened. Mountains moved. Armies mobilized. Cities were built. Not because they had special powers, but because they understood the power of authoritative speech. You have the same power in your life. You are the ruler of your domain. Your mind is your kingdom. Your life is your territory. And the words you speak to yourself are your royal decrees. So let me ask you, if you spoke to yourself the way you would speak to someone you deeply respect, someone with unlimited potential and undeniable value, how would your life change? If you addressed yourself with the dignity and honor you would show to royalty, what mountains would you climb? What fears would you conquer? What dreams would you pursue? Many people speak life to others but death to themselves. They encourage their friends but discourage their own hearts. They praise their children but criticize their own efforts. They celebrate others' small wins but dismiss their own progress. This is a contradiction that cannot produce greatness. You cannot water your neighbor's garden while throwing acid on your own seeds and expect to harvest abundance. Change begins with awareness. For the next 24 hours, I want you to monitor your self-talk. Listen to the words you say to yourself when you make a mistake. Pay attention to the tone you use when you face a challenge. Notice the language you employ when you look at your reflection. Then ask yourself, would I speak this way to someone I consider great? Would I use these words if I were addressing a king or queen? If the answer is no, then why would you speak this way to yourself? You are the ruler of your destiny. You are the monarch of your mind. You are the sovereign of your soul. Speaking to yourself like royalty isn't arrogance. It's alignment with truth. You were created to rule, to have dominion, to exercise authority, not over others, but over yourself, over your thoughts, over your emotions, over your actions, over your destiny. So from this moment forward, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth toward yourself. Speak only what builds up, what empowers, what aligns with your highest potential. Address yourself with the respect and dignity that royalty deserves. Because when you speak to yourself like you would to a king, you begin to live like one. Your self-talk reveals your self-concept. The language you use when no one is listening exposes who you truly believe you are. And here's a profound truth. There is the language of royalty and there is the language of slavery. They create two entirely different realities. I was in Singapore some years ago meeting with business leaders. One man stood out. Not because he was the wealthiest or most accomplished, but because of how he carried himself. When he spoke, people leaned in. When he made a suggestion, others took notes. When he asked questions, the room fell silent. Later, I had dinner with him and discovered something fascinating. This man grew up in extreme poverty. His family of 7 lived in a one-room dwelling with no running water. But his grandmother taught him something that changed everything. She told him, when you speak to yourself, use the words of a king, not a beggar. Beggars ask, kings declare. Beggars hope, kings expect. Beggars accept. Beggars accept what is given. Kings create what is needed. Every morning, this man would practice speaking to himself with royal language when faced with problems. He wouldn't say, I can't handle this. He would say, I have what it takes to solve this. He wouldn't say, I'm worried about the outcome. He would say, I am directing this situation towards success. Over decades, this royal self-talk transformed not just his mindset, but his physical presence. People who knew nothing about his background sensed his authority. His environment began responding to him differently. This is the power of royal self-communication. It's not just positive thinking. It's authoritative declaration. When you study the psychology of human achievement, you discover that your brain doesn't distinguish between what you tell it repeatedly and what is objectively true. Your nervous system responds to the words you feed it. Speak limitation, and your brain creates biochemical responses that limit you. Speak possibility, and your neurology begins creating pathways to achievement. There are 3 principles of royal self-communication that I've observed in the most impactful people across every culture and industry. First, kings speak in absolutes, not maybes, when you talk to yourself. Eliminate words like try, might, hopefully, and possibly. These are the words of uncertainty. Instead, use will, am, do, and create. These are words of certainty. Certainty is the domain of royalty. I once asked a successful surgeon how she handled the pressure of holding lives in her hands. She said, when I scrub in, I tell myself, I am precise, I am focused, I will succeed. I never say, I hope this goes well, or I'll try my best. Those words create doubt, and doubt creates hesitation. In surgery, hesitation can be fatal. The second principle, kings speak from vision, not circumstance. Most people's self-talk is reactive, responding to what is happening around them. The royal mindset speaks from what they have determined will happen. They don't let conditions dictate their internal dialogue. When Nelson Mandela was imprisoned on Robben Island, he refused to speak to himself as a prisoner in his autobiography. He shared that he maintained his dignity by how he addressed himself in his thoughts, while guards tried to reduce him to a number. In his mind, he spoke to himself as the future leader of a free South Africa. His circumstances said prisoner, but his self-talk said president. The third principle, kings take ownership in their language. They never speak as victims. Listen to how most people talk to themselves. Why does this always happen to me? They're making it impossible for me to succeed. I never get the opportunities I deserve. This is the language of powerlessness. Royal self-talk sounds different. I choose how to respond to this challenge. I will create a new approach since this path is blocked. I am responsible for creating my opportunities. Your environment responds to your self-concept. People treat you based on how you treat yourself. Opportunities come or avoid you depending on whether your internal dialogue makes you magnetic or repellent to success. I witnessed this truth in a remarkable way with a school principal I worked with in Atlanta. When he took over, the school was known for violence, poor performance, and hopelessness. Most educators had given up on the students. This principal told me, before I could change the school, I had to change how I talked to myself about these kids in this community. Every morning, I would tell myself, you are walking into a building full of future doctors, engineers, artists, and leaders. Their potential is not determined by their zip code. His self-talk transformed his expectations, which changed his behavior, which altered his impact. Within 3 years, that school became one of the most improved in the state. The same students, the same neighborhood, the same challenges, but a leader with different self-talk. That's the power of speaking to yourself like royalty. It doesn't just change you, it changes everything and everyone around you. When kings and queens throughout history spoke, their words carried weight because they first spoke those words to themselves with conviction. They practiced in private what they pronounced in public. Your private self-talk is the rehearsal for your public life. If you flub your lines when addressing yourself, you'll stumble when facing the world. But when you speak to yourself with the clarity, authority, and dignity of royalty, that inner confidence radiates outward. So I challenge you, elevate your self-talk to royal status. Address yourself with the honor due to someone destined to rule their domain. Speak not as who you once were, or even as who you are now, but as who you are becoming. Because royal self-talk is both the seed and evidence of transformation. Your brain changes physically based on the words you speak to yourself. This isn't philosophy, it's neuroscience. When you consistently speak to yourself with royal authority, you create new neural pathways that make power your default setting, rather than your occasional visitor. Scientists call this neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new connections. But I call it the hardware upgrade that follows your software update. Change your self-talk first, and your brain will literally rewire itself to match your words. Let me tell you about Marcus, a community organizer I met in Detroit. His neighborhood had been written off by politicians, abandoned by businesses, and overlooked by philanthropists. Most residents had internalized the message that their community was beyond hope. Marcus told me, I was caught in the same thinking until I realized something had to change. And that something was how I spoke to myself about our possibilities. He began speaking to himself differently. Instead of saying, we're stuck with what we have, he said, we have everything we need to transform this place. Instead of no one cares about us, he told himself, we haven't yet shown them why they should invest here. Instead of this is just how things are, he declared, this is a community in transformation. Marcus started a small urban farm on an abandoned lot. When neighbors questioned him, he spoke with such conviction about their community's future that they couldn't help but listen. His transformed self-talk became transformed community talk 3 years later. That single lot had expanded to 12 urban gardens, a weekend market, a youth employment program, and a community kitchen. The same people who once said impossible were now saying, what's next? A change in one man's self-talk sparked a revolution in an entire neighborhood. This is the power of speaking to yourself like royalty. It creates possibilities that simply don't exist when you speak to yourself like a victim. How do you practically transform your self-talk? I've studied this question for decades and discovered 4 techniques that work across cultures, personalities, and circumstances. First, audit your current self-talk for 1 full day. Carry a small notebook and write down the phrases you say to yourself most frequently. You'll be shocked at how harsh, limiting, or fearful much of it is. You can't change what you don't acknowledge. Second, create royal replacements for each negative pattern. If you catch yourself saying, I always mess this up, your royal replacement might be, I am mastering this skill more each time I practice. The key is specificity. Vague affirmations create vague results. Third, practice out loud. There's a different level of power when you hear your voice speaking royal truth about yourself. Find a private place each morning and speak your royal declarations aloud. Your ears need to hear what your mouth is saying. Fourth, surround these declarations with evidence. Your mind craves proof. When you tell yourself, I am becoming a masterful public speaker, add evidence. I've already conquered my fear of the stage. I've received positive feedback on my last 3 presentations. I study this craft daily. Evidence turns affirmation into conviction. The compound effect of elevated self-talk cannot be overstated. Small shifts in your internal dialogue, practice consistently, create massive shifts in your external results. Most people want overnight transformation, but that's not how lasting change works. Speaking to yourself like royalty is a practice, not an event. Kings weren't built in a day. They were formed through consistent small actions that aligned with their identity. Many of you are still speaking words passed down to you through generations. Words of limitation, words of fear, words of know your place. These words were chains meant to bind you to smallness. But right now, you can break generational patterns of negative self-talk. You can be the ancestor that future generations thank for speaking a new reality into existence. You can be the one who decided that royalty begins with you when you speak to yourself like a king or queen. You start a new dynasty of possibility in your bloodline. You create permission for those who come after you to do the same. Your royal self-talk is both your inheritance and your legacy. A king's authority is absolute within his domain. His word becomes action. His thoughts become policy. His vision becomes reality. And your domain, your sphere of influence, responds to your internal authority in exactly the same way. Most people never grasp this truth. The territory of your life expands or contracts based on how you speak to yourself when facing its borders. Let me tell you about Elijah, a young man I met in London. Nothing about his background suggested greatness. He grew up in government housing, dropped out of school at 16, and spent his early 20s working minimum wage jobs. On paper, his options were limited. But Elijah had one extraordinary quality. He refused to speak to himself based on his circumstances when he looked in the mirror. He addressed himself as someone with unique purpose. When he made mistakes, he spoke to himself as someone learning valuable lessons, not as someone defined by failure. At 27, with no formal education or connections, Elijah started a transportation company with a single used van. People mocked him. Banks rejected him. Family members expressed concern. But his self-talk remained royal. I am building something significant. My past does not determine my future. Obstacles are merely opportunities for innovation. Today's fleet numbers over 200 vehicles. He employs people from his old neighborhood, giving them the chance no one gave him. The territory of his influence expanded because he refused to constrict his self-talk. This is the pattern I've observed across every success story that defied odds. People who speak to themselves like royalty see opportunities invisible to those with slave mentality. Where others see barriers, they see doorways not yet opened. Where others see endings, they see transitions. Where others see rejection, they see redirection. Your self-talk creates your perception filters. Speak to yourself like a victim, and you'll only notice evidence that confirms your victimhood. Speak to yourself like royalty, and your mind will automatically begin searching for resources, solutions, and possibilities. The way you respond to challenges reveals whether your self-talk is royal or common. Listen to someone facing a serious setback. The language they use tells you everything about how they speak to themselves when no one is listening. Those with royal self-talk say things like, "This situation is serving my growth. I will extract value from this challenge. This temporary setback is redirecting me toward greater success." Those with slave self-talk say, "Why does this always happen to me? I guess this wasn't meant to be. I knew I would fail eventually." Your response to difficulty is a learned language, and you can learn a new one. Speaking to yourself like royalty creates a ripple effect beyond your personal achievement. It changes how you interact with everyone in your path. When you address yourself with dignity, you cannot help but address others the same way. When you honor your own potential, you naturally honor the potential in those around you. When you grant yourself permission to grow through failure, you extend that same grace to others. The kingdom you create within yourself becomes the kingdom you establish around yourself. Your royal self-talk doesn't just elevate you, it lifts everyone in your orbit. This is true dominion, not power over others, but power that empowers others. Not authority that diminishes, but authority that dignifies. So speak to yourself like the ruler you were born to be, and watch as your domain expands to match your declaration. What you say to yourself today echoes through generations tomorrow. Your self-talk creates more than personal success. It establishes a legacy that outlives you. Let me tell you about Maya, a school teacher I met in Johannesburg. Her story changed how I understand the power of royal self-talk. Maya grew up during apartheid in a system designed to convince her she was less than unworthy, second class. The external voices were relentless in their message. Stay in your place, accept your limitations, be grateful for whatever scraps fall from the table. But Maya's grandmother taught her a secret practice. Every night before bed, she was to stand tall and speak to herself as royalty. "You are not what they say you are," her grandmother instructed. "You are descended from kings and queens. The circumstances of your birth do not define the circumstances of your life." Even as a young girl, Maya practiced this ritual faithfully. When teachers told her not to dream too big, she would whisper to herself, "I determine the size of my dreams." When signs and systems restricted her movements, she would tell herself, "My spirit cannot be contained by their limitations." Maya eventually became a teacher herself, but unlike her own teachers, she refused to perpetuate messages of limitation. She spoke to her students, most from severely disadvantaged backgrounds, the way her grandmother had taught her to speak to herself. "You're not defined by your postal code," she would tell them. "You are not limited by your family history. You are not determined by others' expectations." At first, the children didn't believe her. They had already internalized the messages of their environment. But Maya was persistent. She created a daily ritual where each student would stand and declare their value, their potential, their royalty. 20 years later, from her small classroom in one of the poorest areas of Johannesburg, have emerged doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs, and yes, teachers who now carry on her practice. One of her former students, now a celebrated architect, told me, "Maya didn't just teach us academics. She taught us how to speak to ourselves when the world tried to silence us. She gave us a language of possibility that no circumstance could take away." This is the generational power of royal self-talk. Maya's grandmother's words to her didn't just transform one life, they've now transformed thousands. How do you implement this practice daily? Here are 3 commitments that will anchor royal self-talk in your life. First, Create morning and evening rituals. The first words you speak to yourself each day and the last words you hear each night form the bookends of your consciousness. Make them royal declarations. Second, prepare yourself for triggers. Identify the situations, people, or challenges that typically cause your self-talk to deteriorate. Create specific royal responses for each trigger before they occur. Third, build a council of truth speakers. Surround yourself with people who speak to you as royalty and who will remind you of your true identity when you forget. Your self-talk and your purpose are inseparably connected.
Greetings, friends and champions of destiny. In a world that thrives on noise, where constant stimulation is not just expected but demanded, the concept of silence can feel foreign, even uncomfortable. We live in a time where every thought, reaction, or feeling is instantly communicated. Opinions are shouted louder than truth. Emotions are posted before they're processed. Attention spans are sliced into reels and highlights. It's no wonder we feel overwhelmed, burnt out, and disconnected from ourselves, from others, and ultimately from God. But what if I told you that silence, yes, the very thing we try to avoid, is one of the greatest gifts we've been given? What if within the stillness you could uncover healing, clarity, wisdom, and divine direction? What if learning when to hold back is actually the way forward? Let's journey together into the unexpected blessings of silence. And perhaps, in the process, you'll discover that holding back isn't a step back. It's the step into a fuller, richer, more purposeful life. Here is the brutal truth. The moment we wake up, we're thrown into a whirlwind of activity. Alarms buzz, phones vibrate, notifications stack. We check messages before brushing our teeth, scroll the news while sipping coffee, and answer emails while walking to meetings. Our schedules are packed. Our minds race. Our hearts rarely get a chance to rest. We are constantly stimulated. The world has never been more connected, and yet never more distracted. We're always on, always reachable, always processing the next thing. And while technology has blessed us in many ways, it has also blurred the lines between what is urgent and what is important. In all this noise, we lose touch with the present. We lose the ability to simply be, to just sit, to breathe, to reflect. We become human doings rather than human beings. God designed us for rhythm, work and rest, speaking and listening, doing and being. Genesis 1 verse 31 tells us that after creating everything, God saw all that he had made and it was very good. But then what did he do? Genesis 2 verse 2 says, on the seventh day God rested from all his work. Not because he needed rest, but because he was modeling it for us. He was showing us the beauty of rhythm, the sacredness of silence. But in our current culture, rest feels lazy. Silence feels awkward. We equate movement with progress and noise with influence. So we keep going, keep talking, keep reacting until we burn out, lash out, or lose out on moments that matter. And perhaps the most dangerous loss is that we no longer hear God clearly. 1 Kings 19 tells the story of Elijah, weary and desperate. He was looking for God's voice, hoping for dramatic revelation. But God didn't show up in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. Instead, he came in a still, small voice, a whisper. How many whispers have we missed because our lives are too loud? We need silence, not just to rest our bodies, but to restore. Silence is not passive. It is not weakness. It is power under control. It is restraint with intention. It is the space where growth happens, not in the chaos of reaction, but in the clarity of reflection. The world has forgotten the value of silence. We live in a society where people talk to fill space, argue to win points, and interrupt to be heard. But silence, true silence, is an act of strength. It is the ability to hold your peace when your emotions beg you to speak. It is the discipline to wait on God's timing rather than force your own. Jesus modeled this beautifully in Mark 15, verse 5. When Jesus stood before Pilate and was being accused by the chief priests, he made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed. Think about that. Jesus, who had every right to speak, who was the truth, chose silence. Why? Because silence was more powerful than argument. He didn't need to prove himself. He trusted the process. He trusted the Father. He knew that silence could speak volumes. And sometimes silence is the only language heaven needs to move. In our relationships, silence can be healing. In decision-making, silence can be clarifying. In suffering, silence can be strengthening. There's a reason Psalm 46 verse 10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Because sometimes it's only in stillness that we truly come to know Him. And in knowing Him, we come to know ourselves. Silence helps us strip away the noise of expectation, comparison, and fear. It allows us to hear our inner voice, what we truly believe, feel, and need. It gives space for God's whisper to rise above the shouts of culture and ego. When we embrace silence, we begin to live not from the outside in, but from the inside out. We live in a world where silence is often misunderstood. People think that if you're quiet, you're weak. That if you don't speak up right away, you're scared or uninformed. That if you don't shout your opinions from the rooftops, you must not have anything to say. But what if the opposite were true? What if silence was not a sign of weakness, but a sign of incredible strength? There is a kind of silence that isn't born from fear, but from wisdom. A silence that doesn't mean you have nothing to say, but that you're choosing the right time to say it. A silence that comes from deep self-control, rooted in emotional maturity and spiritual alignment. This kind of silence is not empty, it's full of discernment, full of power, full of God. In today's culture, everyone wants to be heard. Social media platforms reward speed and volume. Whoever speaks first, posts fastest, and yells the loudest gets the most attention. We're trained to jump into debates, to have an opinion ready on every topic, to never be the last one to speak. But wisdom doesn't rush. Wisdom doesn't panic to be seen. Wisdom listens. Wisdom watches. Wisdom waits. There is immense power in knowing when not to speak. It takes strength to stay silent when your pride wants to defend itself. It takes self-discipline to hold back when your emotions are boiling over. It takes maturity to listen instead of reacting. And that kind of strength isn't natural. It's developed. It's learned through experience, prayer, and a deep desire to grow. Think about the last time someone misunderstood you. Maybe they accused you of something that wasn't true. Maybe they twisted your words, doubted your intentions, or attacked your character. Everything in you wanted to speak up, to clear your name, to fight back. And maybe you did. But what if you hadn't? What if you had waited? What if you had chosen silence? Not because you didn't care, but because you did. Sometimes silence is not giving up the fight. It's letting God fight for you. In Exodus 14, verse 14, God told the Israelites, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Not every battle is ours to fight. Not every argument needs our input. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is close your mouth and open your heart. Sometimes it's in the quiet that the real work happens. Not out there, but inside of you. Jesus knew this. When he stood before Pilate and the chief priests hurled accusations at him, he didn't defend himself. He didn't argue or plead. Mark 15 verse 5 says, "But Jesus still made no reply, and Pilate was amazed." Pilate was amazed, not by a miracle, not by a sermon, but by his silence. Why? Because it revealed a strength that the world couldn't understand, a peace that didn't make sense. Jesus knew who he was. He didn't need to prove anything. He didn't need to win the argument. He wasn't looking for validation from people. He already had approval from the Father. That's what true identity does. It quiets the noise. It silences insecurity. It allows you to walk away from arguments without losing your value, because your worth isn't found in being right. It's found in being righteous. And righteousness isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. Proverbs 17 verse 28 says, "Even a fool is thought wise if he keeps silent, and discerning if he holds his tongue." That means silence can protect you. It can give you time to think, time to pray, time to choose the right response rather than the fastest one. Have you ever said something in anger and immediately wished you could take it back? Words are powerful and they're permanent. You can apologize, but you can't erase them. They leave impact. That's why the wisdom of holding your tongue is such a gift. Because sometimes silence isn't just about self-control, it's about love. It's about valuing the relationship more than the need to win. There is something deeply healing about a quiet presence. When someone listens without interrupting, when they sit with you in silence, when they give space for your emotions to breathe, that's love, that's grace. And that's a gift you can give others too. You don't always have to fix it. You don't always have to say something profound. Sometimes just being there, quiet and steady, is more powerful than any speech. And the same is true for us. When we are rooted in who we are, when we know whose we are, we stop needing to defend ourselves every time we're misunderstood. We stop reacting out of insecurity. We stop chasing the approval of others and start standing still in the approval of God. Silence becomes a weapon, one that fights pride, diffuses conflict, and keeps us aligned with our higher calling. But let's be honest, this doesn't come naturally. Our flesh wants to react, our ego wants to speak, our pride wants to win. But wisdom doesn't shout. It listens, it waits, it discerns, it asks, is this the right moment? Will my words bring life? Is God leading me to speak, or is he asking me to be still? Proverbs 17 verse 28 offers one of the most surprising truths in Scripture. Even a fool is thought wise if he keeps silent, and discerning if he holds his tongue. Sometimes just keeping quiet is the wisest thing you can do. Not because you don't know what to say, but because you know it's not the time to say it. That's emotional intelligence. That's spiritual maturity. That's walking in step with the Spirit. Not reacting in the heat of the moment. It's easy to speak out of emotion. It's easy to blurt things in anger, frustration, or fear. But words spoken in haste almost always leave regret behind. They can't be undone. They linger in the air, in the memory, in the heart of the person who heard them. That's why silence isn't just a pause, it's protection. It guards relationships. It gives space for perspective. It turns emotional reaction into thoughtful response. James 1 verse 19 gives us a blueprint for this kind of living. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Not quick to react, not quick to argue, not quick to post, but quick to listen, slow to speak. That's not a suggestion, that's a strategy for peace, for healing, for growth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do in a conflict is to say nothing, to listen, not to reply, but to understand, to allow the silence to hold the weight of the moment so that wisdom can rise. This isn't silence born from fear. It's silence born from love. A love that chooses connection over correction. A love that says, your heart matters more to me than being right. And when that love is rooted in Christ, it transforms everything, because you begin to realize that not every battle needs your sword. Not every accusation needs your defense. Not every insult needs your reply. Some things can only be handled in the presence of God. And that means your silence isn't surrender. It's surrendering it to Him. Exodus 14 verse 14 declares, the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Stillness is not idleness. It's an act of trust, a declaration that says, God, I believe. You see what they said, you know what they did, you understand what I feel, and I trust you more than I trust my voice in this moment. That kind of trust is forged in prayer. It's built in the quiet places where we wrestle with our emotions and choose obedience over impulse. But silence isn't just for conflict, it's for reflection, it's for wisdom. It's for moments when your opinion isn't needed, your voice isn't helpful, or your words would only complicate what God is trying to make clear. Sometimes your silence makes room for someone else's healing. Sometimes it invites another person to speak from their heart. And sometimes it just lets the Holy Spirit work without interference. This is especially important in relationships. Whether it's your spouse, your child, your co-worker, or your friend, learning when to be silent is a gift you give them. It communicates respect, patience, and a desire to understand rather than control. And over time, those moments of silence speak louder than 1,000 arguments. They say, I'm listening. I care. I value you more than my pride. But none of this is possible without humility. Because it takes humility to hold back. It takes humility to say, maybe I don't need to speak right now. It takes humility to trust that God can do more with your silence than you could do with your voice. And humility is what opens the door to real wisdom. In Ecclesiastes 3 verse 7, we're reminded that there is a time to be silent and a time to speak. Knowing the difference is the journey of a lifetime. And the only way to learn it is through practice, through trial and error, through listening to the still small voice of the Holy Spirit and asking, moment by moment, is this the time to speak or the time to hold back? Because silence, when used with wisdom, is not passive, it's powerful. It can disarm conflict, heal wounds, preserve peace, and most of all, it can make space for God to move. When you choose silence, you're not choosing absence, you're choosing presence. You're choosing to be fully engaged, heart open, ears tuned, spirit ready. Ready to grow, ready to love, ready to be led. And in the end, that's the unexpected blessing of silence. Not just the absence of noise, but the presence of purpose. Not just the withholding of speech, but the releasing of control. Not just the discipline to stay quiet, but the wisdom to know that in your stillness, God is still working. The way of saying, God, I trust you more than I trust my feelings. I believe you'll make this right even if I don't. This kind of silence isn't passive. It's intentional. It's not avoiding conflict. It's approaching it with maturity. It's not ignoring pain. It's processing it in prayer before reacting in public. It's not weakness. It's wisdom. And wisdom is what separates reaction from response. Reaction is impulsive. It's fueled by emotion. It's loud, fast, and often messy. But response is thoughtful. It's rooted in truth. It's slow, measured, and effective. And the space between the two, that's where silence lives. That's where growth happens. The more you practice strategic silence, the more you begin to feel its power. You notice you don't get pulled into every drama. You don't fall for every provocation. You start to see things more clearly, feel things more deeply, and speak more intentionally. You stop needing to be understood all the time because you're more focused on understanding others. You stop needing to prove yourself because you're confident in who you are in Christ. James 1 verse 19 gives us one of the most transformative principles for relationships and personal development. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Think about that. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. That's not just advice. That's a lifestyle, a way of being that brings peace to your heart and wisdom to your words. Imagine how much more peaceful your life would be if you applied this consistently. If you stopped trying to win arguments and started trying to win hearts. If you stopped speaking just to fill the space and started listening to hear, not to respond, not to correct, but to truly understand. Imagine the kind of person you would become. Grounded, compassionate, respected, wise. That's what silence produces. Not emptiness, but depth. Not avoidance, but intention. Not isolation, but transformation. And so, the next time you feel the urge to speak, pause. Ask yourself, is this the right time? Is this the right tone? Is this coming from a place of love or a place of ego? Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a moment is to say nothing at all. Because in that silence, you're not avoiding the moment, you're owning it. You're choosing peace over pride. You're choosing wisdom over noise. You're choosing God over your emotions. And in that choice, you are becoming who you were always meant to be. Not just a person with a voice, but a person with vision. A person who knows that sometimes the loudest statement you can make is the one you don't say. A person who understands that silence, when guided by God, becomes a weapon of wisdom. Let that be your strength. You can see the quality along, and let that be the unexpected blessing of your silence. The benefits of strategic silence. Silence is not about never speaking. It's about knowing when to speak and when to hold back. Think of the last argument you had. Maybe it started small, a misunderstanding, but then tempers flared, voices rose, and words flew out, words that couldn't be taken back. What if, instead of reacting, you had paused? What if silence had created space for understanding? Proverbs 10 verse 19 says, "When words are many, sin is not absent, but he who holds his tongue is wise." Strategic silence protects relationships. It gives room for empathy. It prevents the kind of damage that words spoken in haste can do. It allows us to respond rather than react. Strategic silence is also powerful in our digital lives. How often do we feel the need to comment, correct, or critique online? There's a temptation to prove our point, to engage in every debate. But sometimes the wisest thing we can do is step back. You don't need to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't need to comment on every issue. You don't need to be seen to be impactful. The most powerful voices are often the ones who speak less, but with greater wisdom. Even when it comes to decision making, silence is a game changer. When we pause before replying to a message, take time before committing to a plan, or pray before giving our opinion, we give space for discernment. Jesus often withdrew to pray before major decisions. In Luke 6 verse 12, before choosing his 12 disciples, he spent the night in prayer. He didn't rush. He didn't crowdsource his choices. He got alone, got quiet, and listened for divine direction, we would do well to do the same. Cultivating a culture of silence. Silence won't happen by accident. You won't wake up one day and find yourself free from noise. Silence must be chosen. It must be cultivated like a garden, protected from the weeds of distraction. Start small. Wake up 10 minutes earlier and sit in silence before the day begins. Don't reach for your phone, reach for your soul. Ask God, what do you want me to know today before bed? Reflect on your day. What did you learn? Where did you see God move? What did you say that you didn't need to? What was left unsaid that you wish you'd voiced? Write it down. Let your journal be a mirror. Practice mindfulness, not in some mystical way, but in a biblical way. Being present, being still, being aware of God in the moment. Psalm 131 verse 2 says, "But I have calmed and quieted myself." It doesn't say God did it. It says, I have done it. We must participate in our peace. Spend time in nature. Go for a walk without music or podcasts. Let creation speak. Romans 1 verse 20 says that God's invisible qualities are seen in what he has made. The trees, the stars, the rivers, they all testify to his glory. But we miss it when we're always plugged in. Create sacred spaces, a quiet room, a prayer closet, a park bench. Make silence a part of your routine, not just a response to burnout. As you do, something miraculous begins to happen. Your internal world becomes stronger than your external one. You become anchored. You become discerning. You become someone who moves with intention, speaks with impact, and listens with compassion. So you become someone who carries peace into a chaotic world, embracing the unexpected blessings. The more you practice silence, the more you realize it's not emptiness. It's full of answers, healing, direction, and even joy. You begin to recognize that every moment you didn't respond in anger, you grew in character. Every time you withheld gossip, you protected integrity. Every time you paused to pray, you invited heaven into your situation. You start to see the fruit of holding back, not as a loss, but as a gain. James 1 verse 19 reminds us, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Not because we are weak, but because we are wise. We often think of silence as an absence, a void, a gap between the meaningful parts of life. Something empty, something passive, something to be filled. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if silence isn't an absence at all, but a presence, a sacred space, intentionally created, a doorway to something deeper, something holy? Silence, in its truest form, is not about being mute. It's not about disengaging from life or shrinking into the background. It's about making the intentional, courageous choice to speak less so we can hear more. To stop reacting so we can start receiving. To stop trying to fill every moment with sound and instead allow God to speak in the quiet. It's not about withholding your voice because you're afraid, but about learning to use your voice with wisdom, precision, and purpose. There is beauty in holding back, not from fear, but from fullness. A heart that is full doesn't always need to speak. A mind at peace doesn't always need to respond. A soul that trusts God doesn't panic in silence because it understands something the world often forgets. Silence is not empty. It's alive with meaning, waiting to reveal what only stillness can show. When we choose to embrace silence, not as a retreat, but as a rhythm, we begin to notice something extraordinary. Clarity starts to rise where confusion used to live. Peace begins to settle in the spaces once dominated by noise. And slowly, gently, the unexpected blessings begin to surface. One of the first blessings is clarity. In silence, you start to hear the truth again. Not just the external noise of others' expectations, but the inner whisper of who you really are. You begin to distinguish between what's urgent and what's important. You realize that many of the things you thought required your voice were never asking for your words. They were asking for your attention. God often speaks in whispers, not in shouts. Elijah discovered this on the mountain when he looked for God in the wind, the fire, and the earthquake, but God was not in any of them. Then came a still, small voice, a whisper in the silence. That's where God was. 1 Kings 19, verse 12. And so often, that's where he still is, waiting for us in the quiet spaces we keep running from. The next blessing we find in silence is understanding. When you stop talking, you start hearing. Not just the words of others, but their hearts. You hear the pain they don't know how to express, the longing hidden behind their anger, the questions behind their accusations. Silence makes space for empathy. It softens judgment and gives birth to compassion. It also helps you understand yourself. When you stop explaining yourself to everyone else, you begin to listen to the unspoken places inside you. You begin to ask deeper questions. Why did that hurt me so much? Why did I feel the need to prove myself in that moment? What wound is still bleeding beneath that reaction? And in those honest, silent moments, God begins to heal. He begins to reveal. He begins to restore what you didn't even know was broken. Another unexpected blessing is alignment. When we're constantly talking, performing, explaining, we can start living for applause instead of purpose. But silence strips away the performance. It returns us to center, to source. It reminds us that our worth doesn't come from what we say or do, but from who we are in Christ. When you spend time in silence with God, your priorities realign. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, and then, perhaps the most beautiful blessing of all, transformation. Silence is not stagnant, it is sacred. It is the soil in which transformation takes root. In the quiet, God reshapes your character. He peels back layers of bitterness, insecurity, and pride. He teaches you to respond with grace, to speak with intention, to love without needing to be loud. The more you lean into silence, the more you begin to reflect the image of Christ. Not just in what you say, but in what you... This isn't always comfortable. Silence can feel awkward at first, even painful. We've been taught to equate activity with productivity, noise with relevance. So to stop, to be still, can feel like failure. But it isn't. It's growth. It's choosing depth over distraction. It's learning that not every conversation needs your comment. Not every offense needs your defense. Not every gap in dialogue needs to be filled. When you embrace the unexpected blessings of silence, you realize something incredibly freeing. You don't have to carry everything. You don't have to manage every perception. You don't have to chase after every misunderstanding. God can handle what you choose to surrender. And often silence is the language of surrender. In Psalm 46, verse 10, God says, "Be still and know that I am God." That is not a suggestion, it's a command. Be still. Let go. Stop striving. Stop talking. Stop defending. Stop performing. Just be. Be still enough to know. Still enough to hear. Still enough to remember that He is God and you are not. That He sees what's hidden. He hears what's whispered. He understands what's unspoken. And He is working even when you're not speaking. Embracing silence is not a one-time decision, it's a lifestyle. It's a practice. It's something you grow into. It's the small pause before you respond, the breath you take before answering, the walk you go on instead of typing out that angry message. It's the journal you write in instead of the argument you start. It's the sacred boundary that protects your peace and deepens your walk with God. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes the most transformational moments come in the simplest of silences. Sitting in the early morning light with a cup of coffee and a quiet heart. Driving without music so your thoughts can breathe. Listening fully to someone you love without planning your reply. Standing in awe of something beautiful without needing to say a word. These are the moments where God speaks loudest. So no, silence is not about being mute. It's about being present. It's about being aware. It's about knowing that your voice matters, but so does your stillness. That your words can heal, but so can your listening. That your presence, quiet and full of peace, can be more powerful than 1,000 well-crafted sentences. And perhaps that is the greatest unexpected blessing of all. Silence teaches you that you are enough, even when you're not speaking. That you are powerful, even when you're still. That you are growing, even when nothing seems to be happening on the surface. Because beneath the stillness, God is moving, He's shaping, He's building, He's blessing you in ways the world may never understand, but heaven always sees. So embrace it, the quiet, the pause, the holy hush between the noise. Don't run from it, run into it. Let it soften you. Let it center you. Let it transform you. Because when you choose silence, you're not just choosing peace. You're choosing purpose. And in that sacred silence, you'll find all the blessings you never expected and everything your soul has been longing for. When we embrace the discipline of silence, we unlock deeper understanding, not just of people, but of purpose. We hear the quiet convictions of the Holy Spirit. We become more attuned to timing, not just what to say, but when to say it. We experience the blessing of peace, not as an occasional feeling, but a permanent foundation. And perhaps most unexpectedly, we become more effective. Because silence doesn't mean we're doing nothing. It means we're doing the right thing at the right time. We're choosing presence over performance. We're choosing wisdom over noise. We're choosing purpose over pride. We're choosing God. And as we begin to bring this message to a close, I want you to take a deep breath. Not just physically, but spiritually. Let everything we've talked about settle in your heart. Let the truth of it breathe. Because this isn't just about silence as a concept. It's about silence as a way of living, of listening, of aligning your life with something greater. We've explored the noise, we've uncovered the wisdom, and we've embraced the blessings. But now it's time to ask, what will you do with it all? What will silence look like in your life from this day forward? To live a life of strategic silence in today's world takes courage. It takes courage to log off when everyone else is online. It takes courage to wait when the world says rush. It takes courage to listen when your ego wants to shout. It takes courage to be still and know that He is God. But in that courage lies your transformation. When you stop reacting to everything, you start responding to the one who matters most. When you stop trying to be heard, you start to hear. And what you hear in the silence, God's whisper, your soul's truth, heaven's direction, will shape you in ways that no amount of noise ever could. So let us not fear silence. Let us embrace it. Let us hold back, not to retreat, but to rise. Let us cultivate quiet, not to isolate, but to connect. And let us trust that in the stillness, God is doing his deepest work. Because silence, my friend, is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of God. And in his presence, everything changes. Good day, beloved friends and champions of destiny. Let me ask you something. Have you ever sat down to get something done, something important, something meaningful, and 20 minutes later, you're buried under a mountain of opened tabs, unfinished thoughts, and notifications screaming for your attention? You weren't lazy. You weren't unmotivated. You just couldn't focus. You told yourself, I'll start now. Then hours passed and nothing moved. You said, this time will be different. But the cycle repeated again and again. And now, silently, painfully, you're wondering, what's wrong with me? Why can't I stay focused on the things that matter? Why does my mind feel like a battlefield I keep losing in? You look around and it feels like everyone else is building, creating, thriving, while you're just surviving, drifting, overwhelmed, ashamed. But I want you to hear this with everything in you. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not incapable. You are distracted from your destiny. And that stops today, because this is not just about time management. This is not just about concentration or self-discipline. This is about your soul's alignment with your assignment. There is a purpose inside you that hell has been trying to distract you from since the day you were born. And the enemy knows if he can't destroy you, he'll just distract you, because a distracted you is a delayed you. A distracted you is a disempowered you. A distracted you is a silent threat. But a focused you is dangerous. A focused you walks in clarity. A focused you carries the power of heaven. Focused you becomes unstoppable because your eyes are fixed on what God called you to do. Hebrews 12 verse 2 says, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Not on fear, not on failure, not on the noise of the world, but on Jesus. Because where your focus goes, your future flows. And in the next few moments, I'm going to walk with you, step by step, into the root of your distractions, the real reason you've been stuck, and most importantly, how to break free and finally reclaim your power, your purpose, and your peace. So don't scroll. Don't click away. This is your moment. This is where everything begins to shift. Not tomorrow, not next month, now. Because this isn't just a message, it's a wake-up call. Your future is calling, but it requires your focus. Let's fix it together. And the enemy of your destiny is not always sin, failure, or even fear. Sometimes it's the noise that numbs your spirit, the noise that steals your attention, the noise that drowns the voice of God. It's the silence of wasted potential. And it's the reason so many never step into the greatness that God has already written into their story. Let me tell you something. The war for your focus is the war for your future. Because where your focus goes, your life follows. In Genesis 1 verse 20, God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly, and they did. But imagine if the waters got distracted. Creation obeys God by responding to his voice, and so do you. But what happens when you stop listening? You lose direction. And when direction is lost, destruction isn't far behind. We live in a world filled with more information than ever, but less transformation. We have faster connections, but weaker convictions. Our minds are so crowded that we can't hear our hearts. So let's ask the real question today. Not just why can't I focus, but what's stealing my focus from what matters most? Patient. Because it's not just about being productive, it's about being aligned. You were created for more than just completing tasks. You were created to build legacies, impact lives, and walk boldly in the purpose of God. But distraction is the assassin of purpose. So why can't you focus? It's not just because you're tired. It's not just because you're busy. It's because you've forgotten who you are and why you're here. The moment you disconnect from your why, your mind becomes vulnerable to anything and everything. And that is exactly how the enemy works. The devil doesn't need to destroy you if he can distract you. He doesn't need to take your life. He only needs to waste your time. Look at Adam and Eve in the garden. They had everything: purpose, peace, presence. But in Genesis 3, all it took was one voice to shift their focus. Did God really say? That's all. Just a question. But that question hijacked their focus and redirected their future. Let me ask you today, what question has hijacked what fear, what memory, what insecurity? Because if you don't take control of your focus, the world will do it for you. And the world doesn't care about your purpose. It only cares about your participation in the chaos. But God is calling you higher. God is calling you to be present. God is calling you to silence the noise. God is calling you to fix your eyes, not on what is temporary, but on what is eternal. Because what you fix your eyes on, you magnify. And what you magnify, you move toward. That's why Hebrews 12 verse 2 tells us to fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Because faith grows where focus flows. So how do we fix it? How do we break free from the mental fog, the spiritual laziness, the emotional distractions? It starts with this: awareness. You cannot defeat what you do not define. You need to ask yourself, what am I feeding my focus? Are you feeding it anxiety, comparison, and clutter? Or are you feeding it clarity, stillness, and scripture? Because the mind will always reflect what it consumes. If all you do is scroll, compare, and react, no wonder your focus is fractured. The Word of God tells us in Romans 12 verse 2, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Not the numbing, not the distracting, loading, not the overloading, but the renewing. And that renewal comes when you stop aligning your mind with the world and start aligning it with the Word. That's how you fix it. You shut the door to distraction and you open your heart to discipline. Discipline is not punishment. It is freedom. It is the muscle of focus. It is the gatekeeper of vision, and it is built one choice at a time. You don't become focused overnight, but you do become focused intentionally. Wake up and start your day with purpose, not with panic. Put your phone down and pick your Bible up. Before you open Instagram, open to Proverbs. Before you check your likes, check your life. Before you measure your value by notifications, anchor your identity in revelation. That's how you realign. That's how you protect your purpose. That's how you silence the noise. Because focus is not about doing more. It is about doing what matters most. Jesus was the most focused man to ever walk the earth. He was surrounded by crowds, demands, distractions, and pressure. And yet, in Luke 5, verse 16, it says, Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. That's focus. That's alignment. That's intention. Sometimes your greatest strength is found in your ability to say no, to walk away, to disconnect from the distractions that dilute your destiny, and to go back to the place where you can hear the still small voice of God again. Your focus is your fire. If you let it burn in the wrong direction, it will consume you. But if you channel it into God's purpose, it will light up your path. Psalms 119 verse 105 says, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Focus illuminates the way forward. Distraction leaves you stumbling in the dark. But today, God is calling you out of the fog. He is saying, come back, sit with me, listen to me. Let me remind you why I created you. Because you weren't made for confusion. You weren't made for overwhelm. You were made for impact. You were made for peace. You were made for focus. Let me speak to the person who feels like they've wasted too much time. God redeems time. He restores years. He revives purpose. Job 2 verse 25 says, I will restore to you the years that the locust hath eaten. That includes the years lost to distraction. That includes the moments wasted in mental fog. That includes the days spent doubting your worth. It's not too late to refocus. It's not too late to restart. It's not too late to step into the life God had in mind when He formed you in your mother's womb. But you must take responsibility. You must stop blaming your phone, your job, your schedule, or your past. And you must start choosing what matters. Right here, right now, choose clarity over confusion. Choose presence over performance. Choose purpose over pressure. Choose the voice of God over the volume of the world. When Peter walked on water, his eyes were locked on Jesus. But the moment he looked at the wind and waves, he began to sink. Matthew 14, verse 30. The wind didn't get stronger. The water didn't change. His focus did. And that's all it takes. A shift of attention can be the difference between walking in miracles and drowning in doubt. So today, I'm calling you back to the miracle, back to the fire, back to your focus. You were not made to merely exist. You were made to excel. You were not made to wonder. You were made to walk with vision. You were not made to follow distractions. You were made to follow Jesus. So fix your eyes, fix your heart, fix your routine, fix your time, and watch how your mind follows. Watch how your clarity returns. Watch how your peace deepens. Watch how your life changes. This is not just motivational talk. This is spiritual warfare. Because the enemy is after your attention, and when you learn to guard it, protect it, and steward it, you become unstoppable. You become dangerous to darkness. You become clear in a confused world. You become light in the shadows. You become a voice that echoes eternity. So stop saying you can't focus. Start declaring, my mind is aligned with heaven. Start declaring, my spirit is alert. Start declaring, my heart is grounded in purpose. Start declaring, I walk by faith, not by sight. 1 Corinthians 5, verse 7. Because when you speak it, you shape it. When you focus, you flourish. And when you prioritize God, everything else falls into place. Matthew 6, verse 33 says it best. Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Not some peace, clarity, purpose, focus. It's all waiting for you. So take a breath, quiet your heart, close the tabs in your mind, and return to the one who holds your attention without competition. God is not just a part of your focus. He is the focus, and in Him, all things align. Let's dig deeper. Because for many of you, the battle with focus isn't just about distractions from the outside. It's about disruptions from the inside. Your mind is restless, not because you're doing too much, but because you're carrying too much. Buried emotions, unhealed wounds, unanswered prayers, silent fears. All of these are quietly demanding your attention, draining your energy and scattering your focus. There's a war happening in your soul, and you're trying to fight it with surface level solutions. You think maybe if you get more sleep, buy a new planner, switch your environment, maybe then you'll focus. But the truth is, if you don't address what's in your heart, you'll always be distracted. Proverbs 4, verse 23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. That includes your focus. You don't need more productivity tools. You need healing. You need forgiveness. You need release. That's why your focus falters. Because your heart is heavy. You can't run toward your calling when you're chained to your pain. So pause for a moment. Reflect. Who hurt you? What disappointed you? What event are you still replaying in your mind that keeps stealing your mental clarity? Until you lay those burdens down at the feet of Jesus, you will continue to operate in survival mode, functioning, but not flourishing. But Jesus didn't call you to survive life. He called you to have life and have it more abundantly. John 10, verse 10. That abundance comes when you stop pretending you're okay and start confessing that you need help. Yes, even help focusing. The Lord isn't just concerned with your salvation. He's concerned with your attention. Because whatever captures your attention shapes your spirit. When your focus is on fear, fear multiplies. When your focus is on failure, failure becomes your lens. But when your focus is on faith, faith births boldness. That's why David said in Psalm 16 verse 8, I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be moved. Did you catch that? I have set the Lord. It was a choice. David chose what to set before him. You have that same power. You can choose what to set before you. You can choose what voices you allow in your life. You can choose what apps you open. You can choose what thoughts you meditate on. You can choose whether you spend your time scrolling or seeking. And the choices you make reveal what you truly value. If your time is the currency of your focus, then your priorities are your bank statements. So ask yourself, where is your attention investing? Is it in God's purpose? Is it in your growth? Or is it in anxiety, approval, and avoidance? It's time to reclaim your focus with intentionality. Because if the devil can't make you sin, he'll make you busy. He'll keep your hands full so your heart stays empty. He'll fill your calendar so he can drain your character. But today, we break that cycle in the name of Jesus. No more drifting. No more I'll do it later. No more watching others walk in purpose while you sit on potential. No more, because there's a fire inside of you that's been flickering for far too long. And now it's time to fan it into flame. Paul told Timothy in Timothy 1 verse 6, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God which is in you. Why? Because even the most powerful gift can grow cold without focus. Even the most anointed calling can be lost in the fog of distraction. Even the most talented person can waste their life if they don't direct their attention. So, hear me today. You don't need more time, you need more focus. You don't need a new job, you need a new mindset. You don't need a bigger platform. You need a clearer purpose. You don't need to hustle harder. You need to surrender deeper. Because real focus doesn't begin with your eyes. It begins with your spirit. And your spirit aligns when you spend time in the presence of God. That's why Jesus said in Matthew 6 verse 6, when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Close the door, block out the noise, disconnect from the feed, because clarity comes in solitude. Direction comes in stillness. Power comes in the secret place. You're trying to find your next step on a screen, but God is trying to whisper it to your soul. But you'll never hear him until you turn down the volume of the world. You'll never follow him until you remove the clutter. You'll never walk in power until you rest in presence. You were never created to do life without divine direction. You need God. You need his word. You need his peace. You need his presence like your lungs need air. Because a focused life is a God-filled life. And a God-filled life is an unstoppable life. So what do you do now? You reset, you realign, you recommit. You open your heart and pray, Lord, sharpen my focus, clear the fog, renew my mind, help me to see what you see, desire what you desire, and pursue what you've called me to pursue. I surrender my distractions, my delays, and my doubts. I choose to walk with clarity. I choose to fix my eyes on you. And as you pray that, something will shift. The weight will lift. The noise will fade. And suddenly, the voice of the shepherd will sound clearer than ever. This is the way. Walk in it. Isaiah 30 verse 21. God is calling you back to purpose, back to joy, back to focus. You were never meant to be tossed by every wave. You were never meant to be led by every mood. You were never meant to be ruled by every notification. You were meant to be anchored, anchored in truth, anchored in grace, anchored in mission, anchored in him. And as you stay anchored, your life will move from chaos to clarity, from frustration to fulfillment, from distraction to destiny. Because when you fix your focus, you unlock your future. Don't wait another day. Don't say next week. Don't postpone the version of you that God already sees. He has called you to walk in purpose now. He has equipped you to focus now. He has given you the power to rise now. So rise, refocus, and run your race with eyes fixed, heart full, and vision clear. And remember, Philippians 1 verse 6 says, he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. You're not finished. You're just refocusing. And your best days, they're not behind you. They are ahead of you, and they are waiting for you to see them clearly. So go, refocus, and never look back, because your future deserves your full attention. Before you click away, before you move on with life as usual, let me speak directly to your spirit. You have one life, just one, and you are not here by accident. You are not watching this by coincidence. This moment, right now, is God interrupting your routine to remind you of who you are. You are chosen. You are called. You are equipped. You are not weak, lazy, or broken beyond repair. No matter what the world has whispered, no matter how long you've been stuck, this is not the end of your story. You are not disqualified. You are not too far gone, but you are responsible to rise up and stop allowing distractions to steal what God has put in you. Because if you don't fight for your focus, the enemy will win by default. You don't need to wait for a sign. This is the sign. You don't need to feel ready. You need to be willing. God doesn't require perfection. He requires surrender. So here's the call. Right now, wherever you are, don't just feel this message. Act on it. Fall on your knees if you must. Cry if you need to. Lift your hands in surrender. Whisper his name if that's all you can do. But do something. Say it aloud. Lord, I am ready. I will not waste my mind. I will not waste my time. I will not waste my life. I fix my focus on you. Take my distractions. Take my confusion. Take my pain and give me purpose. Let this be the day you draw the line in the sand and say, no more. No more letting fear govern your focus. No more letting failure rewrite your identity. No more letting your phone lead you more than your faith. No more. This is your turning point. This is your wake-up call. This is your divine reset. Fix your focus.